going to have to play them for the first time in 2 seasons because they missed each other last year. The Columbiana Clippers on the Latonia schedule. Let's talk about what the Clippers are bringing back this year and what kind of things they have to replace.
Yeah, Columbiana was a team last year that offensively they had their struggles and they really tried to figure it out. And I mean, they started to at some points, but it's definitely going to be a need to be a focal point this year for Columbiana to have a little bit more success. Good thing is, I mean, out of the guys that they lost, we'll look at some of their names. Xavier Cross was a wide receiver for them. Colin Schick was another receiver. And they also lost Jacob Camperman was an offensive lineman. They are returning 5 guys, though. Of those 5 guys that are going to be interesting to watch, Trevor Deering is going to be one of the wide receivers up there. I think he's going to have a pretty productive season. And Tony K, the quarterback for them too, and it's a name that I've asked him before, and I've asked how this is pronounced, and I think it's Kokanger is what it is. Tony Kokanger. I just like calling him Tony K. But Tony Kokanger is going to be the quarterback for them this year, and I think he's going to be the guy that you're going to want to watch, though. He's going to be what's going to make this offense essentially go right. It's going to be pretty much him, I think, and Trevor Deering is going to be his main target, and that's going to be what Columbiana is going to need to do. I think they need to go with a more passing approach, but they need also that running game to complement it too. And to see who that's going to be that steps up. And I think that's kind of what's up in the air right now for Columbiana. They don't really have a full-time back. They have some guys that I think they know are going to be in and out running wise, but I'm curious to see if there's a guy that is going to step up as that full-time back for them and really say, no, there is no part-time back. There's no splitting snaps here. This is my position. And there's some guys on Columbiana's team that I think can make that step. I'm just curious to see if any of them do make that step.
You know, that might be an advantage for Columbiana, though, because we're seeing more and more the higher levels of football. It's a run by tandem kind of thing. You know, the Browns have Chubb and Hunt. A lot of NFL teams, a lot of college teams go with the running backs by tandems now, and you don't see a lot of quote unquote feature backs. And it might be a good thing to have, 2 or 3 guys that all do couple of things better than the other. You have a guy who's a third down back who can really go into the middle and cause some havoc. You got a speed guy on the outside, and you got kind of an all-around guy. It doesn't matter. I mean, it might be an advantage to have 3 backs. You won't deal with conditioning. You won't deal with tired feet in week 8, 9, and 10. Might just be an advantage to have 3 running backs.
It very well could be too, and I mean with the number of running backs you have, it's one of those, if they all do something different, but they all do something very well different, you could really wreak havoc on defenses too, trying to figure out what these guys do, especially early on in the season where they don't know what each guy does really well, and they have to figure it out on the fly.
And then imagine if Columbiana lines up, in a formation where they're both on the field, and the defenses have to decide, well, which one are we going to really scheme to defend? I mean, if one's an edge rusher and the other one's one that they build for up the middle, then, how are we going to defend this?
Exactly. And I mean, it's a team that has a lot of potential, I think, on offense, and it's going to be interesting to see too. But I think that Trevor Deering and Tony Kokanger are going to be the 2 guys, I think, both offensively and defensively, because they do play both ways. But I do think those are the 2 guys that are going to be really the guys you're going to want to watch this year.
Xavier Cross is a big loss for the X Factors, like what we like to call them. But wide receivers, what do you think on their ability to kind of stretch the field for Columbiana coming back? Xavier Cross was also, so fast. He was one of the fastest guys in the league, hard to defend because of his speed. You can't teach speed really. So, what does Columbiana bring back for speed wise?
I mean, I think Trevor Deering and Tony Kokanger are going to be your speed guys, because Kokanger last year was one of those guys. I mean, he threw for over 1,000 yards. And I mean, on top of that, he's able to run and break out of the pocket when he needs to. But I mean, he's gonna be going a lot, I think, to Deering. And Deering's one of those guys. He can beat you speed wise, but he's also very good. Just has very good hands. Runs pretty good routes all around. These are 2 guys too, both Kokanger and Deering, that play on defense. They're both defensive backs as well. So those are the type of guys where you got to hope they have a lot of speed, because not only is Kokanger playing quarterback, Deering wide receiver, they're both playing defensive back as well, and they're responsible for not getting beat on the the outsides and not getting beat downfield. So those are going to be the guys that are going to be really locking up your quarterback or your wide receivers and locking up that defensive backfield and really making sure that that secondary is a strong front on defense this year.
You come through with a perfect segue to talk about the Clippers defense, what they're returning, what they're having to replace on the D front.
I mean, looking at this defense, it was a team that allowed less than 20 points per game last year. It was a very, very good defense. I think 4 games they went under 10 points per. So there was 4 games, I believe, on their schedule, which we'll have to look through, where they held their opponents to just that, to under 2 scores in the game. And that's incredible too on defense. And looking at what they lost, though, there's a few guys, because there was guys that played both sides and guys that played solely defense. Guys like Creed Green on defensive line, Jake Camperman defensive line, Chandler Parrish was a linebacker, Zathan Cross was a defensive back, Brady Dixon was a linebacker, Colin Schick was a defensive back, David Graff was a defensive lineman. So there was a lot of defensive pieces lost. I talked about Ethan Clark. He's going to be playing linebacker for them as well, both ways, as well as Trevor Deering and Kokinger are going to be both defensive backs. But this is a team that, again, lost a lot on defense, kind of a reverse skate of what Latonia did on offense. But this is a team that lost a lot on defense, and it's going to be interesting to see if they don't skip a beat and if they're able to keep that strong defensive team together that they had last year, that team that was able to hold so many teams under 20 in a game. And we all know if your defense is holding them under 20 a game, you got a pretty good shot at winning a lot of games.
And it sounds like their front is what's going to be the biggest question mark. Who's going to step up on their front? Who are they going to be the new guys on their line, their linebackers, to really harden up that front line of the defense? Because in a conference like the EOAC, you got to have a good front. There's a lot of teams that are really good at running the ball. So you better have a good line and a good linebacker core. And it seems like that might be the biggest question mark for the Clippers right now.
I think the biggest thing for the Clippers going into this year, too, even if your defense is allowing more yards and maybe some more scores, if you could at least keep the turnovers where they were last year, because Clippers forced a lot of turnovers on defense. Sure. I believe it was over 15, I think, or just at. So, I mean, they had a lot of turnovers forced on defense. Kokinger helped with that. I think he had a handful of those interceptions wise too, as a defensive back. So there's a lot of guys on this team or a couple guys on this team that are there from last year that really helped force those turnovers. You lose a couple of guys, obviously, but you just kind of hope these newer guys and the guys under the pieces that you still have from last year's team kind of take to this defense. Because, I mean, obviously, we know the scheme, the system's in place to create the turnovers. It's, again, do we have the players that are willing to step up and really be the guys that can fill in those spots?
Let's continue with looking at Columbiana's schedule, what they have in front of them this year, and start with a non-conference schedule that they open up with.
Yep. So they go August 20th versus Lowville, 27th at McDonald, and September 3rd at Wellington to open things off non-conference wise. And I mean, they're testing themselves, especially you're going a very good passing team with Lowville and a very good running team with McDonald, 1-2 punch out of the gate.
Yeah, and that front that we talked about is going to be really tested when McDonald creeps up in week 2. I think we're going to learn a lot about the D-line and the linebackers against that heavy running attack of the Blue Devils.
And just as you'll learn a lot about the defensive backcourt too, and seeing how strong that is, how good the secondary is against Lowville. So I think these are 2 games that, I mean, aren't really a bad schedule. They're early on in the season, first 2 games, and you really get to test both sides of your defense early on and see really where they are, how they are against some of the areas best, and what needs improvements.
And Wellington is a new team on the schedule. They had to fill that week 3 spot. So, playing a team that you weren't coming into the season expecting to play, probably scrounging for some film in the next couple of weeks, getting ready for them. And that'll be interesting to see how the Clippers kind of deal with that change. At least it's week 3. It's not a change to week 1, so you're not scrounging for your week 1 opponent. So they'll have plenty of time to get as much information as possible on Wellington and be ready for that trip. They're going to Wellington too, which is probably, I think, a little bit of a hike from Columbiana, if I say so.
Yeah.
If I remember correctly.
I believe so. I think Wellington, I want to say Wellington is a pretty far drive from Columbiana. I could be wrong, though. I don't actually know exactly where Wellington, Ohio sits as far as in conjunction to
You know what?
Columbiana.
This is
But
why. This is why we have
yeah,
iPhones.
exactly. But as we're talking about Columbiana's schedule, though, yeah, Louisville, McDonald, and then at Wellington, I think the first 2 games of the season is really going to prove to be how mad exactly Columbiana is going to be about that late schedule of Wellington. I think if they're 2-0, they're not going to really care too much about it. 0-2, yeah, they're probably going to care a lot about it. 1-1, maybe not so much. But yeah, I do think those 3 games non-conference wise are actually really good schedules, though, for Columbiana, because I think they're really going to be those 3 games that are going to test this Clippers defense, a defense that lost a lot last year, but a defense that has a lot of pieces that is willing and ready to step up, I believe, and see if those guys are able to step up this year.
According to my phone, I mean, Wellington is, let's see, it's southwest of Cleveland, if it's the right Wellington. I mean, unless there's 2 Wellington, Ohio's.
There could be.
It's almost a 2-hour drive from Columbiana.
And drive times too. You got to talk about the drive there and drive back. So you're looking at 4 hours of driving in a day too. That's dreadful in itself to have to do that.
When you have to replace someone late, you're not really blessed with the opportunity to handpick where you're going to go. I mean, Jackson Milton has to go to Toledo week 1 to replace
all the way across the state to play week 1.
And they'll play at the University of Toledo, which is a fun consolation prize. But still a trip that they probably didn't foresee when they were scheduling their 2021 season.
At least it's week 1 of the season, and at least you guys are going to be healthy for the most part, and they're not going to be bruised from the weeks prior to, and not going to have those aches and those little bit of pains too going into the season. So I mean, at least you don't have to worry about that drive and having to dread that during the season when it's cold out, especially.
And remember, Coach Mike Pavlansky a couple weeks ago laid out it is an advantage to have long road trips during a season, because inevitably, if you make a deep playoff run, you're going to make road trips.
Yeah, and I mean, this is going to test them early on too. I mean, it's a long road trip too. So week 1 out of the season.
Columbiana gets a 2-hour drive in week 3 to Wellington. They're going to be ready for any road trip they have to take the rest of the year. Talk about their EOEC schedule and how that shakes up.
They open up with Wellsville home on September 10th. They play Southern Local September 17th, United the 24th. All those are home games, and they go at Valley Christian on October 1st, at East Palestine October 8th, home versus Latonia the 15th, and at Lisbon on the 22nd. And I mean, just looking at those games, I mean, they have a pretty good advantage of having that 3-game stretch of Wellsville, Southern, and United at home. Those are going to be 2 teams, I should say, in Southern and United that were tied for tops in the EOAC last year. So these are 2 teams that you expect to be competing again for the EOAC this year, and really kind of get to see where you match up against some of the EOAC's best, and if you can make a run at it yourself if you're Columbiana.